guys, welcome to Dia Opina. I am Dia, the day's opinion, and today we have a very awesome guest. His name is David Ha'ivri. Is that how you pronounce it?
Yes, you pronounced it just perfectly. Thank you.
It's the Latin blood. Cool. Well, I first came to know you, as I just mentioned earlier, through a 60-minute story that was done of you in 2014 here in Australia. And for those who don't know who you are, can you just give us a brief outline of your biography? I know that you were born in the US and you came to Israel when you were 11. So beyond that, tell us more about yourself.
Dia, thank you for having me on your YouTube show. I am David Ha'ivri. I live in Israel. I live in the Shamron, which is the northern part of the West Bank. So that would make me when they write about me in the media or about my neighbors, we're called Jewish settlers in the West Bank.
Yeah.
But I don't like youth terminology.
No.
We're just regular people living in the heartland of Israel. And I'm married. I have 8 children.
That's a whopper.
And we live, as I said, in Kfar Tapuach. I do some YouTube, and I have a podcast on Israel News Talk Radio, weekly. And I do some strategy and public relations for the regional municipality. I do international relations and head delegations around the world and receive delegations from different types of groups. They could be clergy, pastors, politicians, journalists, and so forth. And I try to show them around the area that I live in and to show them the reality on the ground from our perspective.
Yeah, that's so you really have your foot in a lot of different things, right?
Yeah, I would guess. I think so. I try to focus, and for that reason, I am presenting myself as a strategist because I'm very, very good at strategizing and branding and putting together the message and showing it outward.
Would you claim yourself to be, in your title of a descriptor, would you say you are a Zionist? Is that a word you would use?
Definitely. Yeah. I am a Zionist. I see Zionism as the Jewish national movement of reconnecting to our homeland. The Jewish people historically came from here, from the land of Israel, from the land of the Bible.
Yes.
The Bible is our history and our spiritual book. It tells about the creation of our nation that came about here in the heartland of Israel some 4,000 years ago, with our father Abraham, Isaac, and Jacob, who dwelled here in the land. And our nation, 2,000 years ago, was destroyed by invaders who came from Greece and from Rome, and banished our people from the land. For 2,000 years, the Jewish people lived in the diaspora, spread out around the world in every different location. But we succeeded in maintaining our national identity through our religion, through our faith, and we believed always that God would fulfill his promise to the nation of Israel and allow us to return to our homeland and to reestablish our nation state, our sovereign state in our historic homeland. And all of that in a nutshell today is expressed in modern Zionism.
So, I watch hours upon hours of YouTube, and someone you're probably familiar with is Ben Shapiro, yeah?
Yes.
Okay.
Yes.
So something that he said that I thought resonated with me was that you cannot always argue from a point of authority that others do not acknowledge. So if you're trying to talk to an atheist about something, you cannot point to the Bible for your argument because it's not a source that they acknowledge. So outside the biblical claim that you state, which I as a Christian obviously would acknowledge as well, but outside of that, if you were to give an argument to your Zionism that wasn't spiritual or religious, what would you say? How would you then convince people about your claim to Zion? I mean, I know my answer to that. I would say the 6-Day War, but what would you say?
Yeah, that's a good question, and I've heard that before. I would like to redefine or to explain my same answer again.
Oh, okay. Sure.
When I describe the biblical significance and the history of the Bible, I don't mean to say to the world, this is my faith, and you need to accept my argument because it says so in my religion. Mm-hmm. But my explanation fits for people of all denominations, regardless to them being religious or not. Of course, Jews and Christians and even Muslims who believe in the Abrahamic faith and the history can relate to the biblical stories of our fathers Abraham, Isaac, and Jacob.
Yes.
But as you asked, say atheists or Buddhists or people who are not of the biblical faith can respond and say, okay, that's your religion, you believe in that, but what does that mean for me?
Yes.
And what I'm saying is that this motivates me as a Jewish person. This is my culture, this is my history. My history throughout the ages has connected my people to our land of origin. So even if you're totally secular, but you understand that we have a historical narrative. The Jewish people throughout the ages believe in this story, the story of our ancient father, Abraham, who dwelt in this land. And he believed that God spoke with him. It's not really that important if God actually spoke with him or not. What's important is that our tradition teaches us that our ancient father was here in this land, and he was connected to the land. And we have all of the biblical stories connected to the land. That's our history. That's our culture. That's our heritage.
It is, but I think the reason I raised it was because many would claim that those stories are not historically accurate, that there is no archaeological findings to that story outside the fairy stories of the Bible. That's what others would claim. Obviously, not myself,
but which is fine, and it doesn't take away from
I'm
my
just
argument.
Devil's advocate. No, it doesn't.
Even if it was scientifically proven today that the entire Bible is a fabrication, which I do not believe that it is. I believe that it's totally true.
Yeah.
But even if a academic research would come about and prove that everything that's written in the Bible did not occur, but the Jewish people have been holding on to this tradition for thousands of years.
They have.
And that tradition is what causes us to be an indigenous people who are connected to a specific piece of land. So the same argument could be made about any indigenous people in any place around the world.
Aboriginals in
you
Australia.
Could go to in Australia, a academic scientist could come and prove that some of their folklore is untrue, did not actually happen.
Yeah.
But those people have believed for thousands of years that a certain mountain has some kind of significance to them. And the fact that they have believed that this mountain has a significance is what actually gives the significance to those people.
Yes, I understand your argument.
Even if the actual event that they're telling about was made up by someone 1,000 years ago. That might have been 1,000 years ago, but for 1,000 years this has been real for those people, and it's connected them to the land.
Yes.
So that's the same argument I'm making. I am a man of faith. I do believe in the Bible. I do try to fulfill the commandments of the Jewish law according to the rabbinical code. But that's my own choice.
Yeah.
Regarding my motivation, my claim to be here, and my national motivation, something unique, incredible has happened as far as the fulfillment of Zionism. 200 years ago, 150 years ago, 100 years ago, this national movement awakened amongst Jewish people in every different place in the diaspora. There's no argument that the Jewish people existed in the diaspora. They were spread out around the world, in Australia, in South Africa, in Yemen, in Poland, in Morocco, in America, in every different place around the world. And this national movement of return, people in all of these places felt this awakening and said, we want to gather and return to our national homeland.
Yes.
something caused this motivation to happen. And this is based on our heritage.
It's due to the 12 tribes of Israel, correct?
Yes.
Yeah. I was going to ask you a question regarding before the establishment of Israel. I'm okay to ask you anything, right? You're not going to get offended.
No, go ahead, ask anything at all.
Okay, so I'll edit that one out.
Yeah, the worst thing that can happen is you can ask me a question and I won't have an answer.
Okay, so basically, prior to to Israel becoming Israel, obviously there was no IDF, correct? So because Israel didn't exist for a long time. So prior to that, there were paramilitary groups, terrorist groups, some would say, like Lehi and the Stern Gang, and another one that was the predecessor to the IDF. I forgot what it's called. And they actually committed several acts of terrorism. And the reason I mention it is because there are some Zionists, I believe, who are a little bit ignorant or won't admit, at least, that it's been bloody on both sides, and that these groups actually killed British people, British lords, and but the reason I mention it is basically that are you aware of the history, which I'm obviously assume that you are, and does that ever factor into your current claims? Do you ever think about the past and that maybe those things play into the Palestinian mindset?
Of course, I'm aware of the history of the establishment of the State of Israel and the events that occurred that you are speaking about between World War I, when the British came into this area, and the British mandate that placed the Great Britain as the custodians of the Palestine Mandate in order to establish a Jewish homeland in this country. And during that time, leading up to the establishment of the State of Israel in 1948, there was a Jewish community that existed in this land. There was immigration. The British ruled this area as the custodians of the League of Nations. And at times, the Jewish community in the land of Israel felt that the British were being unfair as the custodians of the land and were limiting the Jewish immigration to the land, had closed the gates to the land of Israel to Jewish immigrants, and the Jewish leadership felt that the British were not upholding their obligation to allow the establishment of a Jewish state. So different Jewish military groups were established at that time. The number one objective was to provide protection to the Jewish communities who at times were attacked by Arab mobs. There were riots and massacres in Hebron, in Jerusalem, in Tzfat, in Tveria, in different places. And the British government, the Mandate government, was not providing enough protection for the Jewish community. So the Jewish community established its own paramilitary organizations like the Haganah. And the Haganah was the biggest one, the mainstream, the Ben Gurion's organization, the Jewish agency. And then there was the Etzel, the Irgun, which was the Jabotinsky organization, and they are seen as a little more stern, more aggressive. And then from the Etzel, a third group branched off that was led by Abraham Stern, which is also dubbed the Stern Gang because the founder of the organization's name was Stern. But that organization actually called itself Lehi. And Lehi means the Freedom Fighters for Israel. That organization had the most elaborate ideology, they felt that the British needed to be given a push to leave the land of Israel and to allow the Jewish people to establish the independent, sovereign Jewish country.
Yes.
And for that reason, they carried out acts of terrorism against the representatives of the British Mandate in order to discourage the British from extending the British Mandate further beyond 1948. So there are those who look back in history and say the British intended on leaving anyway, but at that time, the British colonialism was common in different places around the world, and the British did have a tendency to establish permanent ownership of other countries where they had their colonies.
Yeah.
Of course, the Palestine Mandate was not a colony, it was a mandate, it was a custodianship, but still it seemed that the British wanted to establish a permanent ownership of this area.
Yeah, no, I understand. So basically, it was terrorism. You would acknowledge that's what was happening at the time.
Yes, in different instances, and each one of the organizations that we mentioned at different times were involved in acts that could be described as terrorism, mostly towards the administration of the British mandate.
Yeah, fair enough. I mean, terrorism is so different today.
In some cases, there were also acts of retaliation against Arab groups who had attacked Jewish groups.
Oh, okay.
Because there was violence directed at Jewish towns and communities, and at some time, some of these organizations used retaliation to fight back against the Arab mobs.
So it's a big mess, isn't it?
That's Israeli history in a nutshell.
Yeah, no, clearly that portion should be taken out and made to a PragerU video. What is your opinion on Trump?
Donald Trump is a phenomenon, very, very interesting. I'm seeing more people who were
never Trumpers, now Trumpers.
No, exactly. That's what you read my mind. There are more people who were never Trumpers who are coming out now and acknowledging that he is an amazing president. And although there's a lot of personal criticism about Trump as an individual in his past, his leadership as a president in the United States, I think, is pretty amazing. I think that he is. I think so. I think that he's doing some amazing things for the American people, and surely his attitude towards Israel and really in the international arena is totally revolutionary as far as American policy up to date, pre-Trump. He's doing a lot of things that many wise men, in air quotes, many experts thought were impossible and mad. And he seems to be getting very positive results all around.
So despite the fact that Donald Trump's son-in-law is a Jew and his daughter Ivanka Trump has become Jewish and his son is also married to a Jewish woman, don't you think the title of Hitler is still completely accurate to his anti-Semitism?
I'm not sure how I connect with that question on a lot of levels. Right. This is okay.
Because he's obviously not anti-Semitic at all, but people say he's Hitler. So.
I think that it is not true. I think that it's very obnoxious. Yeah. I think it's very obnoxious to call someone you dislike Hitler and to try to manipulate the facts in such a way that the person has very clearly come out against anti-Semitism on many occasions. He's not a bigot. He is clearly throughout his career as a private investor and a businessman. It has been a philanthropist who has given his own resources to minority communities, be them Jews or blacks or Hispanic or people from any different origin.
Yeah.
He's been very, and of course his main agenda, he's a businessman, he's very successful. His main objective in life has always been to make the deal.
Yeah.
So he's made many, and he's a smart businessman, but so any smart businessman who's made billions of dollars could be considered greedy. But on the other hand, he's also been generous and helped misfortunate people and been kind to them.
Definitely.
So I see it as manipulative and unfair to accuse him of being a bigot or of being an anti-Semite. And as you mentioned, of course, he has Jewish grandchildren. His daughter became is an Orthodox observant Jewish woman who's married to an Orthodox observant Jewish man, and they bring up their children in the Jewish faith. Trump obviously embraces them, is very proud of them, has not only brought them into his business and relies on them, but has brought them into the American administration to assist in managing the country.
Yeah.
So basically, I think it's very, very unfair and obnoxious to accuse him of being anti-Semitic.
I agree.
It's also very it's manipulative to point at anti-Semites who support Trump, and through that guilt and association to put the blame on Trump as being anti-Semitic, because there are so many instances of anti-Semites who support the other side, who support the opponents.
BDS.
So any politician can be accused of guilt by association because he has supporters who are bad people.